The emergency alarm echoed through station harmony like a death bell. Red lights flashed in every corridor as representatives from dozens of alien species hurried toward the main assembly hall. Fear filled the air so thick you could almost taste. Admiral Kexton stood at the center of the massive chamber, his blue skin darker than usual with worry. His forearms moved nervously as he waited for the crowd to settle. Around him, beings of every shape and size found their seats. Some had scales, others had fur. Some breathed oxygen, others needed special masks. But they all shared the same look of terror in their eyes. Jake Murphy sat in the back corner, almost forgotten. He was the only human in the room, which made him easy to overlook. Most of the aliens barely knew humans existed. Earth was new to the Galactic Defense Council, added only because humans had a strange habit of surviving things that should have killed them. Jake watched the aliens whisper to each other in dozens of different languages. He understood most of them thanks to his translation implant. They were all saying the same thing in different words. They were doomed. Admiral Kexton raised his primary arms for silence. The room fell quiet except for the soft hum of life support systems. "The Void Swarm has reached the outer rim," he announced. His voice carried clearly through the chamber's speakers. 3 more star systems have gone dark in the past week. Deltara Prime, Crystalline Station 7, and the entire Ursine mining colony at Pharaoh's Edge. A ripple of gasps and clicks and growls filled the room. Commander Zix of the Crystalline Hegemony stood up. Her body looked like living diamond, refracting light in rainbow patterns. "How many survivors?" she asked. "None," the Admiral replied. "As always, none." Jake had heard about the Void Swarm but never seen them in action. From what he understood, they were like a plague of machines that ate everything in their path. Planets, ships, space stations, even the people. They broke it all down and used the materials to build more of themselves. General Thokmar of the Ursine Confederacy slammed his massive fist on his seat's armrest. He looked like a 10-foot-tall bear with opposable thumbs and a military uniform. "Our fleets are useless against them," he roared. "Every ship we send just makes them stronger." "That is correct," Admiral Kexton said sadly. "The swarm adapts to our weapons faster than we can develop new ones. They learn from every battle, every strategy we try. What destroys one wave of them protects the next wave." Diplomat Prime Villana of the Ethereal Collective floated above her seat, her ghostly form shimmering with worry. "The projections show they will reach the core worlds within 2 months," she said in her whisper-soft voice. "Billions will die." Jake shifted in his seat. The numbers were staggering. The core worlds held the populations of hundreds of species. If the swarm reached them, it would be the end of galactic civilization as they knew it. "Our scientists have developed one final option," Admiral Kexton continued. He gestured to a hologram that appeared in the center of the room. It showed a device about the size of a shipping container, covered in warning symbols. "The quantum cascade bomb." The room erupted in nervous chatter. Jake had never heard of such a weapon, but the reactions around him made it clear this was something special. And dangerous. "The device can theoretically destroy the swarm's central hive mind," the Admiral explained. "But it must be delivered directly into their core cluster. The bomb's range is limited, and the swarm's defenses make long-range deployment impossible." Commander Zix's crystalline form darkened. "You are speaking of a suicide mission." "Yes," Admiral Kexton admitted. "The pilot would need to penetrate deep into swarm territory, past their outer defenses, and detonate the device at point-blank range. Survival probability is 0. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Every species in the room was looking at each other, wondering who would volunteer for certain death. General Thokmar stood again. "The Ursine military will provide a volunteer," he said with grim determination. "We have many warriors who would gladly die for such a cause. As do the crystalline forces," Commander Zix added. "Honor demands no less. The Ethereal Collective offers our fastest pilots," Diplomat Prime Villana whispered. Jake listened as species after species offered their best and bravest for the suicide run. They spoke of duty and honor and sacrifice. They talked about the greater good and the noble death that awaited whoever took the mission. Finally, Admiral Kexthan turned toward Jake's corner. "Lieutenant Commander Murphy," he said, "does humanity wish to volunteer for this mission?" All eyes turned to Jake. He felt the weight of hundreds of alien stares. Some looked curious, others skeptical. Most seemed to be wondering why anyone would ask the newest species to handle something so important. Jake stood up slowly. He was average height for a human, which made him shorter than most of the beings in the room. His brown hair was regulation short, and his uniform was plain compared to the elaborate dress of the alien officers around him. "Let me make sure I understand," Jake said in his calm, steady voice. "You need someone to fly into the middle of the swarm, deliver this bomb, and blow it up at close range." "That is correct," Admiral Kexthan confirmed. "And you're calling this a suicide mission?" "Yes. The pilot cannot possibly survive." Jake nodded thoughtfully. Then he asked the question that would change everything. For whom? The question hung in the air like a puzzle no one could solve. Admiral Kexthan blinked his large eyes in confusion. "I do not understand your meaning, Lieutenant Commander." "You keep calling this a kamikaze mission," Jake explained. "But kamikaze implies the pilot has to die to complete the objective. I'm asking for whom this is a suicide mission. For the swarm? Or for us?" General Thokmar growled softly. "The calculations are clear, human. No ship can survive that close to the quantum cascade detonation." "Your calculations assume we follow standard attack patterns," Jake replied. "They assume we do what you expect us to do. But humans have a saying. Rules are made to be broken, Commander." Zix's crystalline form flickered with what might have been annoyance. "This is not a time for human optimism. The mathematics are absolute." Jake smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was not a happy smile, but it was confident. "Ma'am, with respect, mathematics told us we couldn't fly until we built airplanes. Physics said we couldn't reach orbit until we built rockets. Every expert in the galaxy said we were too primitive to join this council. But here I am." He looked around the room, meeting as many alien eyes as he could. "You're all talking about who gets to die for the mission. I'm thinking about how to live through it." The chamber erupted in argument. Some aliens thought Jake was being disrespectful. Others called him naive. A few seemed intrigued by his confidence. Admiral Kexthan raised his arms for quiet again. "Lieutenant Commander Murphy, do you believe you can complete this mission and survive?" "I believe the mission can be completed," Jake said carefully. "As for survival, that depends on how creative we're willing to get." "You would volunteer?" "My ship is already the most advanced stealth vessel in the fleet," Jake replied. "My crew specializes in impossible missions, and humans have one advantage nobody else in this room has." "Which is?" Jake's smile grew wider. "We're too stubborn to know when we're supposed to give up." The meeting broke up in chaos. Alien representatives argued in the corridors about Jake's bold claim. Some called him crazy. Others whispered that humans might be more dangerous than anyone realized. A few wondered if there really was another way to complete the mission. Jake ignored the chatter and headed straight to the docking bay where the USS Defiance waited. The ship looked small next to the massive alien vessels around it, but Jake knew better than to judge by appearances. The Defiance was built for one thing: going places other ships couldn't go and coming back alive. Chief Engineer Lisa Carter was already waiting for him in the ship's cramped briefing room. She had pulled up the technical specifications for the quantum cascade bomb on her tablet. Her red hair was tied back in a ponytail, and grease stains covered her work uniform. Lisa always got her hands dirty when she was thinking hard. "Boss, I've been looking at this bomb," she said without looking up from her screen. "The aliens are right about one thing. This sucker will vaporize anything within 50,000 kilometers when it goes off." Jake dropped into his chair. 50,000? That's a pretty big boom. "Big enough to crack a moon," Lisa confirmed. "But here's the thing. The blast is designed to expand in all directions at once. What if we could make it directional instead?" Navigation Officer Ryan Collins looked up from his own computer. He was tall and thin, with the pale skin of someone who spent too much time staring at star charts. You mean like a shaped charge? Exactly, Lisa said, her eyes lighting up. If we can focus the blast, we might be able to get far enough away before the energy wave reaches us. Jake leaned forward. This was why he loved his crew. While the aliens argued about honor and sacrifice, his people were already working on solutions. How long would we need? Give me the exact numbers, Ryan said, pulling up navigation charts. But I'm thinking we'd need at least 30 seconds from detonation to minimum safe distance, even with our engines at full burn. Communications specialist. Carlos Rivera spun around in his chair. He was short and stocky, with quick hands that never stopped moving across his control panels. I've been listening to swarm transmissions, he said. These things communicate on frequencies that would fry most alien equipment. But our gear can handle it. What are they saying? Jake asked. That's just it. They're not really talking. They're more like sharing data files. Battle reports, tactical updates, resource inventories, it's all very organized and predictable. Dr. Amanda Ross looked up from her own research. She was the team's scientist, responsible for understanding alien biology and technology. Her blonde hair was always messy, because she had a habit of running her fingers through it when she was concentrating. Predictable might be the key word. Here, she said. What do you mean? Jake asked. Amanda pulled up a three-dimensional map showing swarm movement patterns. I've been studying their behavior over the past 6 months. The aliens see the swarm as infinitely adaptable, but they're wrong. The swarm follows patterns. Very specific patterns. She pointed to different colored lines on the map. They always scout with these formations. They always attack from these angles. When they feed on a planet, they always follow the same sequence. Strip the atmosphere first, then the oceans, then break down the solid matter. Lisa nodded slowly. Like a computer program. They adapt, but only within certain parameters. Exactly, Amanda said. And here's the interesting part. Every few hours, they have what I call a feeding cycle. All the outer defense ships pull back toward the center to help process whatever they've captured. It only lasts about 5 minutes, but during that time, their defensive perimeter has gaps. Ryan was already plotting courses on his navigation screen. If we could time our approach right, we might be able to slip through. Carlos held up his hand. Wait, there's more. I think I can make their own communication system work for us. If I can mimic their data transmissions, we might be able to convince them we're a damaged swarm unit returning from a mission. Jake felt excitement building in his chest. This was starting to sound possible. How long do we have to figure this out? Admiral Kexthon wants an answer in 6 hours, Lisa said. The swarm is moving faster than expected. If we're going to do this, we need to launch within 12 hours. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Lisa tore apart half the ship's systems to make room for the bomb modifications. She rerouted power conduits, replaced control circuits, and installed backup systems for the backup systems. The other alien engineers who stopped by to watch shook their heads and muttered about human insanity. Ryan worked with the ship's computer to plot 17 different approach routes, each one more dangerous than the last. He calculated fuel consumption, engine stress, and gravitational effects from every piece of debris in the target area. When Commander Zix stopped by to check their progress, she took one look at his flight plans and declared them impossible. Carlos spent hours recording swarm transmissions and breaking down their communication protocols. He learned to identify different types of messages, from simple status reports to complex tactical orders. When General Thokmar visited, Carlos played back a perfect imitation of swarm communication. The massive bear-like alien actually stepped backward in surprise. Amanda dove deep into swarm biology, or what passed for biology in a race of machines. She studied their energy signatures, their movement patterns, and their feeding behaviors. She identified the exact timing of their vulnerability windows and calculated the best approach vectors. As the deadline approached, other members of the Galactic Defense Council came to watch the humans work. They expected to see a crew preparing for death, making final recordings for their families or performing religious ceremonies. Instead, they found Jake's team completely focused on technical problems, The humans argued about power settings and navigation routes and communication frequencies. They debated engine modifications and weapon configurations and survival strategies. Admiral Kexthan arrived just as Lisa finished installing the last modifications to the quantum cascade device. His blue skin looked almost gray with worry. "Lieutenant Commander Murphy," he said formally, "the Council requires your final answer. Will humanity accept this mission?" Jake looked around at his crew. Lisa was covered in grease and coolant, but she gave him a thumbs up. Ryan had dark circles under his eyes from staring at navigation charts, but he nodded confidently. Carlos flexed his fingers over his communication controls, ready to fool an entire alien armada. Amanda clutched her research tablets, her eyes bright with understanding. "We accept," Jake said simply. Admiral Kexthan bowed his head respectfully. "The Council honors your sacrifice." "With respect, Admiral," Jake replied. "We're not planning to sacrifice anything. We're planning to deliver your bomb, complete the mission, and come home for dinner." The alien admiral's eyes widened. "But the calculations prove survival is impossible." Jake smiled and headed toward the ship's bridge. "Admiral, those calculations assume we're going to do what you expect us to do. But we're human. We specialize in doing the unexpected." As the USS Defiance prepared to launch, word spread throughout Station Harmony that the humans were actually confident about their chances. Some aliens thought this proved humans were too stupid to understand danger. Others wondered if humans knew something they didn't. Commander Zick stood at an observation window watching the small human ship power up its engines. "Do you really think they can survive?" she asked Admiral Kexthan. The Admiral watched the Defiance's navigation lights blink in preparation for departure. 6 months ago, I would have said impossible. But these humans have a way of making the impossible look routine. The USS Defiance pulled away from Station Harmony and disappeared into hyperspace, carrying 5 humans who refused to accept that some missions couldn't be survived. Behind them, hundreds of alien representatives waited nervously to see if human stubborn confidence could overcome mathematical certainty. The USS Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of what used to be the Deltaran system. Jake stared at the main view screen in silence. Where 3 planets and 2 asteroid belts should have been, there was nothing but empty space and floating debris. "Sensors are picking up trace elements," Amanda reported from her science station. "Carbon, silicon, iron, all the basic building blocks of life and civilization. But it's all just dust now." Lisa checked her engineering displays. "The stealth modifications are working perfectly. We're invisible to their long-range sensors. But boss, the energy readings I'm getting from the inner system are off the charts." Ryan plotted their course carefully around the debris field. The swarm left a clear path through the destruction. They want ships to follow this route. "It's a trap," Carlos added, monitoring communication frequencies. "I'm picking up dozens of swarm units hiding in the debris. They're waiting for rescue ships or survivors to come looking." Jake nodded grimly. This was their first look at how the swarm operated. They didn't just destroy civilizations. They used the wreckage to hunt anyone who came looking for survivors. "Take us deeper into the system," Jake ordered. "We need to see what we're really dealing with." The Defiance moved carefully through the graveyard of worlds. What they found made even Jake's experienced crew fall silent. Entire cities had been broken down into their component atoms. Oceans had been drained and processed. Even the rocky cores of planets had been stripped away, leaving nothing but empty space. "How many people lived here?" Lisa asked quietly. Amanda checked her files. The last census reported 12 billion Deltarans across all 3 worlds, plus about 2 million visitors from other species. "All gone," Ryan whispered. As they approached the inner system, they encountered their first active swarm units. The machines looked like enormous metal spiders, each one the size of a city block. Their bodies were made from materials Jake didn't recognize, and they moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. "They're beautiful," Amanda said softly, "in a terrifying way." "They're also scanning everything in range," Carlos reported. "But they can't see us. Lisa's modifications are holding. The deeper they went, the more swarm units they encountered. Some were builders using processed materials to construct new machines. Others were scouts patrolling the edges of the formation. Still others seemed to be guards, their weapon systems clearly visible and ready for action. There, Ryan pointed, to his navigation display. Long-range sensors are picking up the main cluster. It's about 2 light minutes from here. Jake studied the readings. The central formation was massive, easily the size of Earth's moon. Thousands of swarm units moved in perfect coordination, forming geometric patterns that shifted and changed, like a living thing. That's not just a fleet, Lisa observed. It's more like a floating city. Or maybe a brain. Amanda was running detailed scans. The energy signature is incredible. Whatever's at the center of that formation is using more power than most star systems. It's not just controlling the swarm units, it's thinking. They spent the next 2 hours observing and recording. Jake's crew documented everything they could about swarm behavior, communication patterns, and defensive formations. The aliens back at Station Harmony had been right about one thing. A direct assault would be suicide. The swarm's defenses were layered and overlapping with no obvious weak points. But as they watched, Amanda noticed something interesting. Jake, look at this pattern. Every 4 hours and 37 minutes, the outer defensive units pull back toward the center. The feeding cycle you mentioned, Jake said. Exactly. But watch what happens to the patrol routes. Amanda highlighted different groups of swarm units on the tactical display. For about 5 minutes, there are gaps in their coverage. Narrow ones, but gaps nonetheless. Carlos had been monitoring swarm communications throughout their observation. I think I've figured out their command structure, he said. The units closer to the center give orders to the ones further out. It's like a military chain of command, but completely automated. Can you fake it? Jake asked. Give me another hour to study their protocols, and I think so. But boss, if I mess up even one transmission, every swarm unit in the cluster will know exactly where we are. Lisa had been working on the bomb modifications during their surveillance. The shaped charge configuration is ready, she reported. If we can get within 10,000 kilometers of their central core, I can direct the blast away from us. But we'll still need at least 30 seconds to reach minimum safe distance. Ryan was already plotting approach vectors. I can get us in during the next feeding cycle. But the exit route is going to be tricky. We'll be flying through debris fields at maximum acceleration while every swarm unit in the cluster tries to kill us. Jake studied all the information his crew had gathered. The mission was dangerous, probably more dangerous than anything they'd ever attempted. But it was possible. Barely possible, but possible nonetheless. All right, people, he said finally. We go in during the next feeding cycle. Carlos, you'll need to convince them we're a damaged swarm unit returning from a failed mission. Lisa, have the bomb ready to deploy the instant we reach the target. Ryan, plot us the fastest exit route. You can manage. Amanda, keep monitoring their behavior patterns. If anything changes, I need to know immediately. The crew spent the next few hours in final preparations. Lisa ran diagnostics on every system twice. Ryan calculated and recalculated their approach. Route. Carlos practiced mimicking swarm communication protocols until he could fool their own computer. Amanda continued studying the central formation, looking for any last-minute insights. As the next feeding cycle approached, Jake felt the familiar tension that came before a dangerous mission. But it was mixed with excitement. They had found a way to do what the entire Galactic Defense Council thought was impossible. They were going to deliver the bomb and live to tell about it. Feeding cycle begins in 30 minutes, Amanda announced. Outer defensive units are starting to pull. Back. All stations ready, Jake ordered. Carlos, start transmitting. Make us look like a damaged scout returning to the hive. Transmitting now, Carlos confirmed. His fingers danced across his controls, sending carefully crafted messages that identified the Defiance as Swarm Unit Designation 447 Delta 9, reporting battle damage and requesting docking instructions. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then response signals began coming back from the swarm cluster. Carlos translated them quickly. They're buying it, he said with relief. They're giving us approach clearance and directing us to a repair facility near the central core. Perfect, Jake said. That's exactly where we want to go. Take us in, Ryan. The USS Defiance began its approach to the swarm cluster, disguised as one of the enemy's own units. Jake watched the tactical display as thousands of hostile machines moved around them in perfect formation. Any one of those units could destroy his ship in seconds if they discovered the deception. But for now, they were invisible hunters moving toward the heart of the deadliest enemy the galaxy had ever known. And they were going to survive this mission, no matter what the mathematics said about their chances. The deception worked perfectly for exactly 12 minutes. The USS Defiance glided through the swarm formation like a wounded shark returning to its school. Massive machine units moved around them in geometric patterns, their metal bodies gleaming under the light of distant stars. Carlos continued sending fake status reports while Ryan followed the approach vector the swarm had provided. They were less than 50,000 kilometers from the central core when everything went wrong. "Deep scan incoming," Amanda warned, her voice tight with concern. "One of the larger units is running a detailed analysis of our hull composition." Carlos's fingers flew across his controls. "I'm trying to jam their scan, but they're using frequencies I haven't seen before." Jake watched the tactical display as a swarm unit the size of a space station turned toward them. Its scanning beam was like a searchlight, examining every inch of the Defiance's hull. For a moment, Jake hoped Lisa's modifications would fool the deep scan. Then alarms started blaring throughout the ship. "They know," Carlos said simply. "Every unit in the cluster just received an alert. We're not swarm." The change was instant and terrifying. Thousands of swarm units that had been ignoring the small human ship suddenly turned toward them with deadly focus. Weapon systems that had been dormant lit up with targeting energy. The entire formation began shifting to trap the Defiance in a cage of firepower. "All power to engines," Jake ordered. "Lisa, give me everything we've got." "Already on it," Lisa replied, her hands dancing across her engineering controls. "Rerouting power from life support, artificial gravity, even the coffee maker. We've got about 10 minutes before the ship starts falling apart from the stress." Ryan threw the ship into a diving turn that would have crushed any normal crew. The Defiance's inertial dampeners screamed in protest as they pulled forces that should have been impossible. "First wave of attackers coming in from above," he reported through gritted teeth. The space around them exploded into chaos. Energy, beams that could slice through battleship armor passed close enough to their hull to leave scorch marks. Projectile weapons fired streams of metal that moved at significant fractions of light speed. Any one of those shots could have vaporized the Defiance instantly, but Ryan flew like his life depended on it because it did. He used the swarm's own formation against them, diving between larger units so their weapons would hit each other instead of his ship. When a group of attackers tried to box them in, he used the gravity well of a massive constructor unit to slingshot away at impossible speed. "How are we still alive?" Amanda asked, clinging to her station as the ship bucked and twisted through impossible maneuvers. "Because we're not doing what they expect," Jake replied. "Their targeting systems are designed to fight ships that follow normal physics. We're breaking every rule in the book." Carlos had turned his communication array into a weapon, broadcasting feedback loops that jammed swarm coordination in their immediate area. Every few seconds, a group of attackers would suddenly lose formation as their communication link went down. It only lasted moments before they adapted, but those moments gave Ryan the openings he needed. Lisa was performing miracles with the ship's systems. She rerouted power flows in ways that should have blown every circuit on the ship. When the main engines overheated, she switched to the backup thrusters. When those failed, she used the attitude control jets. When even those started to fail, she began venting atmosphere through the airlocks to provide thrust. "Engineering report," Jake called, out during a brief lull in the attack. "We're held together by hope and prayer," Lisa replied. "But we're still flying, and that's what matters." The running battle served a purpose beyond just staying alive. Every attack taught them more about swarm capabilities and weaknesses. Jake realized that the aliens' previous failures hadn't been due to lack of firepower. They had failed because they couldn't adapt when their initial strategies didn't work. "Amanda, are you getting readings on their central core?" Jake asked. "Yes, and Jake, there's something weird here." Amanda's voice carried excitement despite their desperate situation. The energy signature isn't what we expected. The core isn't just controlling the swarm. It's using massive amounts of power for something else. Like what? It looks like containment, like they're using all that energy to keep something locked up. Jake felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking together in his mind. Carlos, can you intercept communications from the central core? Working on it, Carlos replied while simultaneously jamming another wave of attackers. Got it. But Jake, this isn't swarm communication. This is something else entirely. The signal Carlos had intercepted was unlike anything they had heard before. It was complex, layered, and somehow desperate. Whatever was sending it was clearly intelligent, but it wasn't part of the swarm's hive mind. It's a prisoner, Amanda said with sudden understanding. The swarm isn't just a weapon, it's a prison system. Lisa chose that moment to make an announcement. That changed everything. I've been working on the bomb modification during the fight, she said. I can reconfigure it as a directed energy pulse instead of an explosion, but someone would need to stay behind to manually calibrate the device. Absolutely not, Jake said immediately. Wait, there's more, Lisa continued. If Amanda's right about the containment system, our bomb might not just destroy the swarm. It might release whatever they're keeping locked up. Jake felt the full weight of the situation hit him. They weren't just on a mission to save the galaxy from the swarm. They might be about to unleash something even worse. Options? He asked. I can modify the bomb to strengthen the containment instead of destroying it, Lisa said. Use the quantum cascade energy to create a permanent prison that doesn't need constant power. But the timing would have to be perfect. Ryan pulled them through another impossible maneuver, using the debris from a destroyed swarm unit as cover. How perfect are we talking? Split-second timing, Lisa admitted. And we'd need to be close enough to manually trigger the device. Really, close. Amanda was still analyzing the energy readings from the central core. Whatever they have locked up in there, it's been trying to break free by converting galactic civilizations into processing power. The swarm wasn't created to destroy. It was created to contain. Jake made the decision that would define the rest of the mission. We're not destroying the prison, he announced. We're going to fix it. Lisa, start the modifications. Ryan, get us to that core. Carlos, I need to talk to whatever's trapped in there. Boss, are you insane? Lisa asked. Probably, Jake replied with a grim smile. But we're about to find out if human insanity can save the galaxy. The USS Defiance continued its deadly dance through the swarm formation, no longer just trying to survive. Now they were racing against time to prevent a catastrophe that could be worse than anything the galaxy had ever seen. And they were going to do it the human way, by refusing to accept that some problems don't have solutions. Jake's decision to communicate with the imprisoned entity changed everything. While Ryan continued their desperate flight through the swarm formation, Carlos worked to establish contact with whatever was trapped in the central core. I'm getting a response, Carlos reported, his voice filled with amazement. It's trying to communicate with us. The signal that came through was unlike anything they had ever heard. It was intelligent, ancient, and filled with a loneliness that made even Jake's hardened crew feel sorry for it. The entity had been trapped for thousands of years, watching civilizations rise and fall while it remained locked in its quantum prison. It's not evil, Amanda said after analyzing the communication patterns. It's just incredibly powerful and desperate to be free. The swarm was built to contain it because no one knew how to communicate with it or understand what it wanted. Lisa continued working on the bomb modifications while the ship shook from near misses. I can strengthen the containment field, but we need to get much closer. The quantum cascade has to be triggered from inside the prison structure itself. How close? Jake asked. Close enough to touch it, Lisa replied grimly. We'd need to dock with the central core and manually install the device. Ryan checked his navigation displays. That's not just dangerous, boss, that's impossible. The core is surrounded by the densest concentration of swarm units in the entire cluster. We'd never make it through. But Jake was already forming a plan. It was crazy, dangerous, and had almost no chance of success. In other words, it was exactly the kind of plan humans were known for. "Carlos, can you convince the entity to help us?" Jake asked. "Help us how?" "Tell it we're going to fix its prison so it doesn't need guards anymore. But we need it to distract the swarm for a few minutes, while we get close enough to install the device." Carlos sent the message, and the response came back immediately. The entity was willing to help, but it had a condition. It wanted Jake to promise that humanity would eventually find a way to free it properly, without just keeping it locked up forever. Jake didn't hesitate. "Tell it we promise. Humans don't like seeing anyone trapped against their will." The entity's response was a surge of hope and gratitude that made the ship's communication systems overload temporarily. Then it began to act. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The swarm units around the central core suddenly began behaving erratically. Some spun in circles. Others fired randomly into empty space. A few actually began attacking each other as conflicting commands flooded their communication networks. "It's overloading their control systems," Amanda observed with excitement. "The entity is using its own processing power to flood the swarm with junk data." "Windows open," Ryan announced. "But it won't last long. The swarm is already adapting to the interference." Jake made the call. "Take us in, full speed to the central core." The USS Defiance dove toward the heart of the swarm cluster like a missile, seeking its target. Around them, chaos reigned as thousands of machine units struggled with contradictory orders and system failures. But Jake knew it wouldn't last long. The swarm's adaptation protocols were already working to counter the entity's interference. They reached the central core with seconds to spare. The structure was massive, a geometric lattice of energy conduits and quantum processors that hurt to look at directly. At its center, contained within layers of force fields and quantum barriers, was the entity that had been trapped for millennia. "Docking. Port located," Ryan reported. "It's not designed for ships like ours, but I think we can make it work." Lisa was already suiting up for a spacewalk. "The bomb has to be installed manually. I can do it, but someone needs to stay with the ship to trigger the device once I'm clear." "I'll go with you," Jake said. "Boss, if something goes wrong, the ship needs you here." "If something goes wrong, we're all dead anyway," Jake replied. "Carlos, you have the con. Keep the entity happy and the swarm confused for as long as possible." Jake and Lisa suited up and made their way to the airlock. The central core loomed before them like a geometric mountain, its surfaces crackling with energy that could disintegrate them instantly if they touched the wrong part. "Stay close and follow my lead," Lisa said through the comm system. "The quantum cascade device needs to be installed at the exact center of the containment field." They made their way across the surface of the core, moving carefully between energy conduits that hummed with power. The entity watched them through sensors they couldn't see, occasionally sending helpful guidance through Carlos to keep them away from the most dangerous areas. Installing the device was like performing surgery on a living star. Lisa worked with tools that barely functioned in the intense energy field while Jake held the quantum cascade bomb steady. Around them, the battle between the entity and the swarm's control systems raged on. "Device installed," Lisa announced. "But Jake, the containment field is stronger than we thought. The cascade reaction might not be enough to create a permanent seal." Jake had been thinking about this problem during their approach. "What if we don't seal it from the outside? What if the entity helps us seal it from the inside?" "You want to ask a prisoner to help lock its own cell?" "I want to ask someone who's been trapped for thousands of years to help us build a better prison. One that doesn't require guards or constant maintenance. One that gives it room to exist without threatening." "The galaxy." Lisa stared at him through her helmet visor. "That's either brilliant or completely insane. Let's find out which one." They made their way back to the ship where Carlos relayed Jake's proposal to the entity. The response was immediate and positive. The entity was tired of being feared and hunted. It was willing to accept a better prison if it meant the swarm would stop consuming civilizations in its name. "Cascade device ready," Lisa announced from her engineering station. "But we need to coordinate the timing perfectly. The entity has to channel its power into the containment field at the exact moment we trigger the bomb." Jake looked around it. His crew. They had come so far from the original suicide mission. Instead of dying to save the galaxy, they were about to save it by showing mercy to an ancient enemy. All stations ready, Jake ordered. Carlos, tell our friend it's time. Entity acknowledges, Carlos replied. It's ready to help. Lisa, trigger the device. The quantum cascade bomb detonated, but instead of destruction, it created something new. The entity channeled its vast power into the cascade reaction, transforming the explosion into a crystalline matrix that surrounded the central core. The new prison was stronger than the old one, but it was also more comfortable, giving the entity room to exist without the constant pressure of containment fields. The effect on the swarm was immediate. Cut off from their controlling intelligence, millions of machine units simply stopped moving. They didn't self-destruct or go berserk. They just powered down, becoming nothing more than empty metal shells drifting in space. It worked, Amanda said with amazement. The swarm is completely inactive. And the entity is secure, Lisa added. The new containment system is self-sustaining. No more feeding on civilizations. Jake opened a communication channel to the entity. One last time. We kept our promise about fixing your prison. Now we need to keep our promise about finding a way to free you properly. The entity's response was patient and grateful. It had waited thousands of years. It could wait a little longer for humans to figure out how to solve impossible problems. The USS Defiance left the swarm cluster behind and headed home to Station Harmony. They had accomplished something that no alien strategist had thought possible. They had turned a suicide mission into a rescue operation, saved the galaxy from destruction, and shown mercy to an ancient enemy. When they docked at the station, Admiral Kexthon was waiting for them. Lieutenant Commander Murphy, he said formally. The Council requires a full report on your mission. Jake smiled as he stepped off his ship. Admiral, we completed the mission, the swarm is neutralized, the galaxy is safe, and my crew is alive to tell about it. But the projections said survival was impossible. The projections assumed we would do what you expected us to do, Jake replied. But we're human. We don't like accepting impossible odds. As news of their success spread throughout the station, Jake realized that humanity had just announced itself to the galaxy in a way that no alien species would ever forget. They had shown that humans didn't just survive impossible situations. They found ways to make impossible situations work for everyone. The story would be told for generations about the day humans were given a suicide mission and turned it into something else entirely. Something better.